The bank letter arrived on the coldest morning of the year, and Emma Carter read the words, "Final notice of foreclosure," 3 times before her hands stopped shaking enough to fold the paper back into its envelope. Outside her kitchen window, her 2 children, 6-year-old Lily and 8-year-old Tommy, were building a lopsided snowman with mismatched buttons for eyes, laughing in a way that made the weight in Emma's chest feel even heavier, because she knew that laughter might not last much longer. She had $11 in her purse, a rusted truck that coughed black smoke every time she turned the key, and no idea how she was going to feed her children through the rest of the week, let alone survive the winter. Her husband, Daniel, had been gone for 14 months, killed in an accident at the lumber yard where he worked, and since that day Emma had been drowning quietly, smiling for her children while the walls of her life slowly closed in around her. If you believe in second chances, in kindness that arrives when you least expect it, and in stories that remind us why we keep going even on our hardest days, take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Golden Outlaw Tales so you never miss the next story like this one. Now, let's step back into Emma's story. That same afternoon, driven by desperation more than hope, Emma bundled the children into the old truck and drove into town, praying she could find any kind of work before the week ran out. She stopped at the little diner on Main Street, the hardware store, even the church notice board, but nothing was hiring, and every polite refusal felt like another door closing on her family's future. It was Tommy who spotted the flyer first, pinned crookedly to the corkboard outside the feed store, its edges curled from the wind. It was handwritten in shaky block letters. Wanted, cook and housekeeper for ranch. Room and board included. Ask for Walter Hale. Emma almost walked past it, assuming a ranch that size would want someone younger, someone without 2 children trailing behind her. But something in her chest, some last flicker of stubborn hope, made her write down the number instead. She called that evening from the payphone outside the gas station because her own phone had been disconnected weeks earlier. The voice on the other end was gruff, low, and impatient, the voice of a man who had spent 60 years talking mostly to cattle and empty fields. He didn't ask about her resume or her references. He asked only one question: did she know how to cook a decent supper? When Emma answered yes, he told her to come out to the Hale Ranch the next morning, and then he hung up before she could ask anything else. The ranch sat 15 miles outside of town, a sprawling piece of land with a farmhouse that had clearly once been beautiful, but now wore the tired look of a place too big for one aging man to maintain alone. Walter Hale was 71 years old, broad-shouldered even in his old age, with a face weathered by decades of sun and loss, and eyes that studied Emma and her children on the porch with a sharpness that made her nervous. He didn't smile when he greeted them. He simply looked at Lily, who was clutching her brother's sleeve, and then he said the words that would change all of their lives. He told her plainly that he needed a cook, someone to keep the house from falling apart around him, and that in exchange, her kids needed a home, a real one, with heat in the winter and food on the table every night, and that as far as he was concerned, that was a fair trade. Emma stood frozen on that porch, unsure whether to cry from relief or from the shame of how badly her family needed a stranger's charity. But Walter simply turned and walked back inside, leaving the door open behind him, which she would later understand was his quiet way of saying yes. Come in, you belong here now. The first weeks on the ranch were not easy. Walter was a man of few words and rigid habits, set in his ways after decades of solitude, and Emma often found herself walking on eggshells, unsure whether her cooking, her cleaning, or her children's noise would upset the fragile peace of the house. Tommy and Lily, still grieving their father in ways they didn't fully understand, were wary of the old rancher too, keeping their distance and speaking to him only when spoken to. Emma worked from before sunrise until after dark, cooking 3 meals a day, mending curtains, scrubbing floors that hadn't been properly cleaned in years, all while trying to homeschool her children in the evenings since the nearest school was too far to reach reliably in winter. There were nights she cried quietly in the small room she shared with Lily, overwhelmed by exhaustion and the fear that she was simply trading one kind of survival for another, that she had traded desperation in town for servitude on a stranger's land. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. Emma noticed that Walter always left his coffee cup exactly where she could reach it without asking, a small consideration that told her he was paying more attention than his silence suggested. She noticed that he never once complained about her cooking, even on the nights she burned the biscuits or oversalted the stew, and that instead he would simply say it was good, plain and matter of fact, in a tone that carried more comfort than any elaborate compliment could have. Then one evening, when a winter storm knocked out the power and the whole house went dark and cold, Emma found Walter in the barn showing Tommy how to check on the horses by lantern light, patiently explaining which animals got nervous during storms and which ones needed a gentle hand. And for the first time since Daniel's death, she saw her son's face light up with something that looked almost like belonging. The turning point came on a night in late January, when little Lily woke up burning with fever, her small body shaking with chills that frightened Emma more than anything had in months. The roads were iced over, the truck wouldn't start, and Emma stood in the kitchen with her daughter in her arms, panic rising in her throat as she realized she had no way to get help. It was Walter who came down the stairs at the sound of her crying, still in his nightclothes, and without a single wasted word he pulled on his boots and his coat and told her to wrap Lily in blankets while he brought the old work truck around, the one that always started no matter the weather because he kept it running out of pure stubbornness. He drove them through the storm himself, gripping the wheel with white knuckles, taking back roads he'd known his whole life to avoid the worst of the ice, and he sat in the hospital waiting room the entire night, refusing to leave even when Emma insisted he go home and rest. When the doctor finally said Lily would be fine, just a bad flu that needed fluids and time, Walter let out a breath Emma hadn't realized he'd been holding, and in that moment she understood that this gruff old man, who had buried a wife decades earlier and lived alone ever since, had let her children into the empty chambers of his heart without either of them noticing it happening. After that night, the walls between them came down in ways neither had expected. Walter began joining them at the supper table instead of eating alone in his study, asking Tommy about his schoolwork and letting Lily braid ribbons into his weathered old hat, indulging her with a patience that surprised even himself. He taught Tommy how to mend fences and read the weather in the shape of the clouds, skills passed down from his own father decades before, and he began, without ever quite announcing it, treating the boy like the grandson he'd never had. Emma, in turn, found herself laughing again, really laughing, for the first time since Daniel's funeral, and she noticed that the ranch, once a lonely and crumbling place, was slowly coming back to life around them. The fences mended, the garden planted again in spring, the kitchen always warm with the smell of fresh bread. Word spread through town, as it always does in small places, about the widow who had gone to work for old Walter Hale, and some folks whispered unkind things, assuming the worst of an arrangement they didn't understand. But those who actually visited the ranch saw something entirely different. A family being quietly rebuilt out of two kinds of grief, an old man's loneliness and a young widow's desperation, woven together into something neither of them could have created alone. Walter began introducing Emma not as his cook, but simply as family, and he started teaching Tommy the business side of ranching too, walking him through the ledgers, the cattle sales, the decisions that kept a place like this alive for another generation, as though he were quietly, deliberately, passing something down. By the time autumn rolled around again, the ranch that had once been drowning in debt and disrepair was thriving, its fields golden with harvest, its barns full, its kitchen always warm with the sound of a family that had found each other in the most unlikely of ways. Emma still thought of Daniel every single day, and she always would, but she had learned that grief and gratitude could exist together in the same heart, that loss did not have to mean the end of warmth or belonging. Walter, for his part, had gone from a man counting down lonely days to one who woke every morning eager for the sound of small feet running down the stairs and the smell of coffee brewing in a kitchen that was, finally, truly a home again. If this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that kindness can arrive in the unlikeliest of places and that family isn't only made by blood, but by the people who choose to show up for one another, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need these words today. Before we go, we'd love for you to comment one single word below that describes how this story made you feel, whether it's hope, grateful, moved, or anything else in your heart right now, because we read every single one, and your voices are what keep these stories alive. Emma Carter never forgot the day she saw that crooked flyer pinned to the feed store corkboard, the day an old rancher's blunt offer of a job saved not just her family's shelter, but their sense of belonging in a world that had felt, for far too long, unbearably cold. And Walter Hale, who had spent so many winters alone in a house too quiet and too big, learned that sometimes the family you need most isn't the one you're born into, but the one that walks up your porch steps on the coldest morning of the year, carrying nothing but hope and two small children who would, in time, call him grandfather. The ranch stands still today, fences mended, fields full, laughter echoing through rooms that once knew only silence, a living reminder that even in our darkest winters, kindness has a way of finding us exactly when we need it most.